All right. Welcome to episode 9 of Davos Watch, where we keep an eye on the global elites from Davos to the UN and all the other advocates of global fascism and totalitarian technocracy. This week, I wanted to highlight Klaus Schwab. I think for the next couple of episodes, I'm going to do very kind of like the 101s of these Davos type organizations and groups. So why not start with Klaus Schwab, founder and chairman of the World Economic Forum? Klaus Schwab is the face of the World Economic Forum, and for many, including me, is the face of the globalist agenda, as illustrated by my use of him in the logo for Davos Watch. Despite the fact that Klaus Schwab has been in his role for 50 plus years, he's 85 years old. And I think for an 85-year-old, he actually looks pretty good. 50 plus years as the head of the World Economic Forum. Despite the fact that he has been developing relationships with an incredible amount of world leaders, business leaders, heads of state, you name it, despite the fact that he is an enormously influential person on the world stage, he is still not a household name. So I wanted to dedicate this episode of Davos Watch to taking a good look at Davos Man himself, Klaus Schwab. Based on my research, Klaus Schwab is a world-class influence peddler and a man that would do business with the devil himself if it would further his agenda by only an inch. And I have some articles and video clips to back up all those claims. So the first article that I want to talk about is actually a Vanity Fair piece that came out. It's probably a year old, this piece, but there's a lot of great stuff in here that kind of paints a pretty clear image of who this man really is. So first off, the article talks about Davos, the most recognizable events hosted by the World Economic Forum. It's located in the posh ski resort summit. It's an excuse to rub elbows with Bono and Bill Gates and other celebrities and cultural elites, all while enriching himself on membership fees and partnership contributions. The World Economic Forum is funded by Schwab's ability to convince multinational corporations to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for the privilege of simply being labeled a strategic partner. So he's got that salesman quality to him, right? The article describes the World Economic Forum headquarters. It says, quote, a glass-fronted campus looking out on Lake Geneva. A hallway connecting two wings is lined with photos of Schwab posing with world leaders. The article describes Klaus Schwab's wealth, his homes, his cars, his globe-trotting expenses, etc. And it also dives into who Klaus Schwab is as a person. One of the most interesting stories that's in this Variety Fair piece describes a time when a World Economic Forum employee, running late for work and aware that Schwab was overseas, dared to park in the boss's parking spot. Schwab, in tune with the strife of the working people, was compassionate and told his employee that they could use his spot whenever he's not around. No, I'm just kidding. Schwab insisted that she be fired, relenting only after senior staff intervened to save her job. How dare she try to park in his parking spot when he was out in Dubai or something like that? So the article boils down to the idea that Klaus Schwab is an influence peddler and a successful one at that. But let's not just write off this person as just simply a grifter. That would be doing Klaus Schwab an absolute disservice in terms of his impact and global power at a global level, at international levels. As has been made painfully clear to me ever since we began doing work on the Great Reset and ESG, the World Economic Forum has wielded massive power and influence in ushering in so-called stakeholder capitalism, ESG, and pushes in industries from agriculture and energy to finance and insurance to decarbonize and push towards net zero. So how does one achieve this? Yes, Davos conference are great places to rub elbows with the movers and shakers of the world. And it's also a great place for meetings to be had and agreements to be struck. But one of Klaus Schwab's favorite programs of the World Economic Forum is the Young Global Leaders Program. Reading from the World Economic Forum website, quote, The Forum of Young Global Leaders is a community with the vision, courage, and influence to drive positive change. During a transformational 3-year experience, young global leaders are inspired to be bold in undertaking a sense of shared responsibility, impact, and ambition. And I think next week, I'm going to dedicate Davos Watch to this idea of the Young Global Leaders program. It's very interesting, and there's a ton of noteworthy people that are a part of this Young Global Leaders program. But for the sake of this episode, just know that the program is designed to groom the next generation of global leaders to conform to the agenda of the World Economic Forum. So we have a clip. The first clip that I want to show is Klaus Schwab bragging about the influence of the Young Global Leaders program in international affairs. So let's go ahead and play clip 1 of Klaus Schwab.
Actually, this notion to integrate young leaders is part of the World Economic Forum since many years. And I have to say, when I mention our names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina, and so on, is that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
And that's true in Argentina too. Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now. Mm-hmm. I'm with the president, who is a young global leader. But what is important for me is those young global leaders have an opportunity to come here. And we, in addition to the young global leaders, we have now the global shapers in 450 cities around the world.
Yeah, so it's a very, very interesting clip there. There's a lot to unpack. He's talking about Merkel and Putin as being former young global leaders. The Putin one apparently is a little subject to not sure if that's true. I mean, clearly he says that in the video, but I've done some research on it, and it's very inconclusive of whether or not that's actually the case. I don't know if he meant that people in the Putin administration come from the Young Global Leaders, but I mean, he clearly says right there that Putin was a former member of the Young Global Leaders. But yes, he talks about how the World Economic Forum, through this Young Global Leaders program, is able to penetrate administrations of countries around the world. Justin Trudeau in Canada, and more than half of his cabinet are alums of the Young Global Leaders program. They bring up Argentina in there as well. But doesn't that context make everything that's happened in Canada over the past several years, especially during COVID, make all the more sense? It just seems to fit a little bit better, knowing that they're getting all of their kind of their beliefs and worldviews from the World Economic Forum. So this is an incredibly influential infrastructure that Schwab and the World Economic Forum has built. And again, still your average person doesn't know who he is. So let's take another look at just kind of the business angle of good old Klaus Schwab. So not only can we point to the authoritarian and dystopian policies that stem from the World Economic Forum, whether it be ESG, the Great Reset, or anything like that, but we could also look at the way that he talks about straight up dictatorships like China. So we have another clip of Klaus Schwab talking about the China model of governance with a state-owned media network in China. Let's go ahead and play clip 2.
The base has been formed, but we have to go one step further. We have to have a strategic mood. We have to construct the world of tomorrow. It's a systemic transformation of the world. So we have to define how the world should look like, which we want to come out of this transformation period. I respect China's achievements, which are tremendous over the last over 40 years. I think it's a role model for many countries, but I think also we should leave it to each country to make its own decision what system it wants to adopt. And I think we should be very careful in imposing systems. But the Chinese model is certainly a very attractive model for quite a number of countries.
Yeah, such an attractive model that the World Economic Forum's got for controlling their country. It doesn't seem like the words of someone that has a foundational belief in freedom and limited government. And just recently, in November, Klaus Schwab was at a conference in Beijing where he met with several leaders of SOEs in China. And SOE is a state-owned enterprise, so owned by the Chinese government. Schwab praised the SOEs and expressed gratitude for the SOEs' participation with the World Economic Forum, saying that the World Economic Forum is willing to further strengthen cooperation with China and these state-owned enterprises. So forget an adherence to Western democratic standards or freedom in general. If the Communist Chinese Party wants to do business, count Klaus Schwab in. And the last thing that I want to point out that kind of paints a pretty good picture of Klaus Schwab comes from that same clip where Klaus Schwab at the very beginning of it says that we have to construct the world of tomorrow. We have to define how the world should look like and transform it into that image or whatever he said. And I could find you a dozen quotes of Klaus Schwab talking about designing the future. And now he would suggest that when he talks about we have to design the future, surely he's talking about stakeholders. But when was the last time you or I were invited to Davos? That's not the case. This is his vision. This is his little posse of people that are trying to design what the future looks like and construct things like ESG to make sure that we can push society in the direction of that vision. The reality is, Schwab sees himself as a grand organizer of society. A vision must be determined, and through the use of his influence and infrastructure he has erected, we can structure society so that it meets that vision. That's what the Great Reset is. That's what the Great Narrative is, and that is the worldview of Klaus Schwab. So, Jim, I'm going to go to you first. Thoughts on Klaus Schwab, the young global leaders, or anything else that I had to say during my monologue?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why Schwab is so, visibly excited that so many of his quote unquote young global leaders have, quote, penetrated the cabinets and have been elected prime minister of countries like Canada and Germany. And it's because he knows, and he has a smile on his face because of this. He knows that it's because those people, those leaders of those countries and the people in those cabinets are not going to be serving the will of the people, their constituencies, their voters. They'll be serving and carrying out his will, his agenda. And that agenda, of course, is a socialist freedom-killing agenda that has been cooked up over decades at the World Economic Forum. It's the same reason why he seemed to have a tone of glee when the pandemic hit, because it was this golden opportunity that they could not pass up to start putting into place by fiat the kinds of command and control and freedom-killing policies that they had only dreamed about. He probably thought he would die before the perfect world that he had in mind would start to come to fruition. But there you go. With the pandemic, he was able to see how well it worked in real time. And to the disappointment of everybody who loves freedom, I was very disappointed to see so many people just lay down and take it. And so what I like about those clips and about the Davos Watch segment, Donnie, is that it proves that this is not some conspiracy theory. This is fact. He lays his agenda out plainly, and he does it repeatedly. He says that the world of tomorrow will be built. Mm-hmm. And then he's always careful. Well, we don't want to impose systems on the nations that need to do this. So of course, he's already imposing his systems on the freedom, on the free West, what used to be considered the Western world, the free West. He was, of course, talking about China. We wouldn't try to impose any kind of free market capitalism on China. Your command and control system, your oppression of inconvenient people with inconvenient thoughts. That's the model we actually like. We like that one, and we're trying to spread it around to the Western world.
Do you know who else said something just like that, by the way?
Sorry?
Do you know who else said that, like basically that exact same thing about praising China's model of governance or whatever? Justin Trudeau. He said that during COVID. He like said that like, oh, I wish I had like some of that power or whatever. It's like, clearly you're an acolyte of Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. Sorry.
Yeah. And I'll just wrap up by saying, and so you mentioned at the Great Reset, one of its foundations is replacing free market capitalism with quote unquote stakeholder capitalism. And so that's an economic model that of course is untried, unless you want to count all the communist countries in the world that have slaughtered millions and have relegated the survivors of their tyrannical regimes into lives of misery and poverty. But so this is what he wants to do. And guess who gets, as you mentioned, Donnie, guess who isn't a stakeholder? You, me, Linnea, the listeners to this podcast. You're not a stakeholder. It's very bad news for you there. So it's important that this keeps being hammered, or else we're all going to get hammered by a freedom-killing socialist globalist agenda.
Jim, you didn't mention me, so am I?
Yeah, you're in the club.
Am I part of the club?
Report to Dubai right now. Get to your copies. Yeah.
I knew you were a spy, Chris. That's why I was just letting everyone know.
Donnie, just real quick. When I was teaching American government in South Carolina, one of the questions on the year-end test was, what is the most efficient form of government? Dictatorship. You know why? Because the dictatorship can just instantly, with the snap of a finger, just say, okay, this is happening. Okay, that's happening. Klaus Schwab loves that. Democracy, republics, federalism, all this stuff, checks and balances, the systems that we have in place here and in, some places in Europe and some other places around the world. It's messy. It means that you can't just do things quickly. But one of the other things that stood out to me was the audacity of him to say, I know the future. And we will plan the future. No, you don't. Because in 1980, do you think anyone in their right minds would have said, the internet, this thing is just going to come up and it's going to revolutionize? Of course not. Trial and error, innovation, ingenuities, they're sparked organically. Mm-hmm. He cannot stand the fact that it happens organically outside of his control. He's a control freak. He wants to control. He wants to micromanage. He wants to just, have the ability to tell people how to live their lives. Most of, I think, Americans still at this point in time reject that. And I hope that mentality, stays, because if that mentality goes away, just like Ronald Reagan said, we don't pass freedom down in the bloodstream. It has to, be like erected in every single generation. But one of the things that they're very, very good about is the education system, and like the young leaders and all this stuff. They are trying to brainwash and indoctrinate, and I am fearful, because I saw it happening before my very eyes when I was teaching students, even in South Carolina, that they buy into all this stuff. They buy into it, and I hope that at some point in their lives they will recognize that this is not the way to move forward. But I'm just becoming a little less confident of that happening the more I see how much this is, being entrenched in younger generations, whether it's climate change or social justice or any of these things. They're all intertwined.
Right. Linnea, final words on any of this? If you have any comments on Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, or just my, Davos Watch segment in general, what do you think?
It's a good segment. Other than the fact that Klaus Schwab is like actually a cartoon character. I saw someone in the comments say that he is literally Spectre.
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah, pretty much. It's
Ernest Blofeld.
I think it's kind of fundamental to what Chris was saying. It's kind of fundamental to progressives in general to believe that there is a charted out plot of history that is inevitable, and all of the things that they do are are trying to reach towards that utopia. And anything that detracts from the utopia is some kind of aberration that needs to be cut down and forgotten about. So I think it's pretty much par for the course, and we should never be surprised that any of these people act like totalitarians when that's what they are.
Barack Obama constantly used this phrase, and I'm sure Jim remembers it: the arc of history bends towards justice. That is a complete, falsehood. There is no arc of history. The arc of history is what we make of it. And if we follow, and if we follow their model, it's not going to be towards justice. It's going to be towards tyranny.